we should be aware of the levers of control and influence that exist in our society and looking at the subtext behind things, which is kind of funny because it seems to be what these glasses are revealing, right? Like, to some extent, I think that's why they're so memorable, is they seem to reveal the subtext behind each of these messages. Welcome, friends, to episode 327 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss John Carpenter's 1988 film, They Live. So, for the record, I want to state it is November 4th, 2024. It is the day before the American election, presidential election. We obviously do not know what's going to happen. I've already voted early. If you're listening to this, it is going to be after the election, so you do know what happened. So your perspective is going to be very different than ours at this moment, but just try and remember, we have no idea whether it, how we're going to be feeling in a few days. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. Certainly an interesting time to be covering a subject and a project like this one.
I mean, we wanted to cover horror again because we wanted to continue the horror trend after Halloween. So I saw this when I was a teenager, when I was having like a John Carpenter sort of marathon, just through all of his material. And I don't think I remembered enough of like the subtext to it to have correlated how much this is an interesting project to be covering right now.
Yeah.
Let's just say weird, classist, fascist sort of aliens in disguise in our government doesn't feel that far off in some cases as we watch this movie. It reminded me why I like this movie. Quite funny, and obviously like a big political satire commentary sort of movie. And it's kind of fun to watch something like this from 1988. Very in-your-face sort of action, but kind of like, I don't know, more left-leaning action adventure.
I absolutely
for sure.
think so, yeah. I had never seen this movie. I think I'd seen the famous fight sequence in like a Reacts video or something. And I didn't know it until I got to it, and I was, oh, this is that movie. Because it is, we'll get to it. It's a very interesting one to talk about. But I certainly didn't know it was John Carpenter. I didn't know that it was based on a short story, which is why we're covering it on Ink to Film, which we can talk about here. It's written by Ray Nelson in 1963. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to be talking about right now. Oh, I guess I had seen like the scene where he puts the glasses on and he sees the word obey and stuff like that. Like, I feel like that's just an iconic sequence that gets referenced a lot, and I've seen that before. And I'd seen the look of what the, I'm going to call them ghouls, since that's what the movie credits them as, even though I don't think the word ghoul ever appears in the movie.
Rowdy Roddy Piper, a wrestler of his day, was transitioning into making movies. And in what he claims is one of the first times a wrestler made this move.
One of the first times a wrestler was in movies? Wasn't like Hulk Hogan an 80s action movie star?
I think he was more TV. Like, I don't know that he was doing a lot of films and stuff.
Or maybe it was more 90s I'm thinking of, because I know Hogan definitely crossed over into movies at some point.
Roddy Piper claimed in my research that he was the first to do it.
Certainly seems like one of the first.
But my point is just that this movie is not going to be necessarily for everyone, and it's also like, I think of our generation, we grew up with movies like this, like we're more receptive to it, I think, in a sense. But it is, I mean, literally the iconic line from the movie is, I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. And like, that's a line that like I've heard a million times.
I never knew where that was from.
Yeah, the one-liners, the action nature of it.
It's such a wild movie, and honestly, the story is too, which we'll start off by talking here in a second. But the project in general is so ham-fisted and like hits you over the head with it. Not elegant at all. It's not particularly well crafted. It's very broad, and it could easily be misinterpreted. And I've seen that it has been by people. And it's because of that, what I'm talking about, it's like it doesn't do a very good job of sort of making a coherent message that necessarily, I think, I mean, it's there if you want to find it, but it's also easily misinterpreted. But I don't think that's necessarily the fault of the filmmakers. But it just feels true for me for this. And there are things about it I really liked, and there are things about it that I was kind of repulsed by and felt like wrong watching.
Yes.
which we can get into. But it was kind of a mixed bag for me overall. But overall, like, I still enjoyed it. And like you said, it's like a 1988 film. It's a really fun kind of time capsule to look back on. And I was delighted that it had this like leftist message behind it, this anti-capitalist message, because I was kind of expecting it wouldn't be that way, and I was a little worried. I was like, what is this going to be kind of saying?
I think movies like RoboCop of that time period, like they were kind of in their own vein, and some people weren't picking up on that subtext that it was kind of more left-leaning. But I appreciate it for the same reasons, and you more elegantly spoke about it there. But that's what I'm trying to get at, is that like I don't think anybody's walking away saying this is like the greatest movie ever, or it's not breaking new ground. In a lot of ways, it's like referencing back, or it's like very of that time. But at the same time, it's like fun to watch it, and you get like, there are the things that bothered me, and then I found myself throughout being like, is this intentionally supposed to be something that bothers me, or is this supposed to be like more in the vein of what John Carpenter has said is like more of like a, you know, takedown of capitalism and like Reaganomics and like the political climate of the time. Knowing John Carpenter and seeing a lot of his other films, this one sits in a really interesting spot because like he's kind of referencing like 50s sort of like sci-fi alien movies in a way. Like the look of it going to black and white, the look of the ghouls even for that time was a bit like throwback looking, and like to see him do that and then seat it in like something that was like culturally relevant at his time, and then to be watching it in 2024 and to be like, I mean, this is like the conspiracy theory people that are walking around being like, the lizard people are under the ground and they're going to find you. And like, that's literally like what this movie is. But somehow with its messaging, I found it to still lean in a way that I'm like, this is a charming movie, even in a kind of in a fun John Carpenter kind of way.
It is almost like exactly the lizard people conspiracy theory, which is a real conspiracy theory, whether or not, you know, people want to like believe it.
Are you telling me it's real? Wait. It's as in true?
As in it is an actual thing that there are people who believe it or seem to. Yes, and the theory basically goes that there are like lizard people who are in positions of power in disguise as human beings. And there's like, I don't know, I've listened to some podcasts that actually like break down like where this all got started and the people behind it, and like books that were written about it, and these like grifters who made lots of money off of it, of course, and how it's proliferated over the years and has a lot of ties to QAnon and other like cultist like conspiratorial thinking, who think about these like secret cabals and all this stuff. And like there's a lot of like really troubling, dark, real world politics and conspiracy theories that John Carpenter's playing with here, and he's doing it in a way that is just like, I don't know, it's so in your face and over the top and like unserious.
Unserious is meant to be funny, like and like even at that time, the ridiculousness of this, it's bombastic, but it's so funny because it's also in my estimation also kind of maybe poking fun at those types of movies. If you wanted to dig into that layer of it, like, is he actually making that movie, or is he like the people who misinterpreted this movie like that kind of stuff and like is kind of poking fun at like how ridiculous it can be? Because, you know, we've seen like your Big Trouble in Little China's or you know, Escape from New York. Like he has that side to him that's like just wild and over the top, and this is definitely playing with that. And then you look at something like The Thing that we covered way back when, which we'll steer you back to.
I think that's our only other John Carpenter film we've tackled on this podcast, and that's going all the way back to the very beginning.
Yeah, very beginning. We'll steer you there. Check it out. It was early days, so you know, give us a break. And
Mike Arnzen joined us. He had some intelligent stuff to say, at least.
Quite an interesting time that was for the podcast. But anyway, we talked about John Carpenter. We'll talk about him a little bit more today. But yeah, just in the larger sense of his work, it sits at a really interesting intersection.
Okay. Well, I think let's shift gears for a moment, and we're going to talk about the short story. I fully recognize this is a story most people will not have read. So we'll kind of describe it to you. It's very short. And talk a little bit about Ray Nelson, and you can see the ways in which this was an adaptation that led to the film we got. So Ray Nelson was an American science fiction author and cartoonist. He was an active member of the science fiction fandom and was sort of known in fan circles as being this big-time fan. He spent 4 years studying in Paris, where he met Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, and many other Beat Generation icons. In Paris, he also worked with Michael Moorcock and claimed that he smuggled then-banned Henry Miller books out of France. So I just thought that was an interesting little note of something that he claims to have done. He began his career writing and creating cartoons for science fiction magazines. Later, he wrote professionally, published short stories like Turn Off the Sky, Nightfall of the Dead Sea, and his best-known story, 8 O'Clock in the Morning, which I guess I should have said, is the name of this story that that became They Live, which, by the way, They Live is a better name than 8 O'Clock in the Morning. But we'll talk about why that's the name of the story. It was published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in November of 1963, which, by the way, that magazine is still going today. Still considered one of the best magazines out there.
Wow.
So Ray Nelson and artist Billy Ray adapted this story into a comic titled Nada, so it got another name, which was published in 1986. And that is what director John Carpenter saw. He saw the comic adaptation of it, and that's what went on to inspire him to make the movie. I went and looked at the comic and actually read through it because it's also very short. It's interesting. It's got some good stuff to it, got some pretty cringy stuff to it too, but interesting one to look at for sure. So this is, kind of, it's one of those interesting situations where it got adapted and then it got adapted from an adaptation. So it kind of went through several phases getting to the film we got. Other notable things is that he collaborated with Philip K. Dick in 1967 on an alien invasion novel, The Ganymede Takeover. He said he was friends with Dick starting in childhood, and in a documentary about him, Nelson says that the only times that Philip K. Dick tried LSD were the 2 times that he gave it to him.
Cool.
So, I've always heard stories about Philip K. Dick and his, mind-altering substances and stuff, and this is, one of the guys who gave it to him. So, as I was kind of showing, he was very involved in the sort of fandom at the time, and he knew a lot of these writers. In 1982, Nelson's novel, The Prometheus Man, gained a special citation as a runner-up in the Philip K. Dick Awards. In the early 70s, he ran a writer's workshop in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of his students was Anne Rice.
Very cool.
So he's got all these connections to different people that we've talked about, to different projects we've done, and he was inducted into the first Fandom Hall of Fame in 2019 for his lifelong genuine love of science fiction and his enthusiastic service to the community for decades. He died at the age of 91. So, really, really interesting guy. He also, the one last note I'll give about him is that he has claimed that his greatest claim to fame is that he is the inventor of the iconic propeller beanie that is the emblematic sign of a science fiction fan. He claims that he created it when he was a 10th grader at Cadillac High School. So,
love that.
If you ever seen that, the propeller hat for the nerd kind of thing, he claims that that's him. So that's Ray Nelson, and he wrote the story 8 O'Clock in the Morning, which bare bones is pretty similar to the movie, but has a lot of, I guess, some significant differences.
Yeah, I liked it. I actually watched the movie first and then read the short story, which sometimes I'll do when we have these 1-week projects where we combine both mediums. And I was surprised. I was like, oh, this is like a John Carpenter film. He must have changed a lot of this. And then to note that, I guess the big change being there was this hypnotist sort of scenario where everyone's kind of under the trance and then he breaks out of it.
He goes to this stage show where a hypnotist is doing a show and he says, "Wake up." And I guess somehow it only affects him, but he's the one guy in the audience who wakes up from this hallucination that apparently everybody in society is suffering, where they're not able to perceive these lizard people who are implied to maybe be aliens, but I don't know if it's confirmed. And they look pretty different than they do in the movie, but they're definitely hideous looking. And he immediately starts killing them.
Yeah.
He just turns completely murderous. He meets somebody in an alleyway who just talks to him, and he just sees them and sees what they look like. He just picks up a brick and beats them to death.
Yeah.
So some pretty wild violence happens immediately.
And some of that carried over into the character of
absolutely.
Nada in the film, because it's this guy was ready to fucking kill some aliens.
No hesitation.
Even the short story does have the sort of added layer of the controlling elements and seeing obey and seeing some of the things that are around disguised as something else.
Get married and procreate. There's certain ones that make it through all versions of this story.
Yeah. So and that is a big that reveal in the film is such it's so iconic, and I said the visual difference that Carpenter employs is so cool. But to see that started from the source was I was excited to see, and he's going around. He goes to I believe girlfriend or wife's, I think it's his girlfriend's house,
Yeah.
and
Her name's like Lil.
and ends up like killing a guy and dragging him into her house, and he's like, look, can't you tell? And she's like, no, I can't tell. And he's like, then
he goes to his girlfriend and like slaps her across the face. Like, he's abusive. He's trying to like wake her up.
And then he has to like tie her up and
murders somebody in front of her, ties her up.
And then he decides to like go to the base, right? He goes to like I think it's like a TV studio.
It's the TV studio, yeah. It's a TV studio. Yeah, and once he goes there, he has a similar kind of thing that happens in the movie where it's different, I guess, but he broadcasts out a message to wake up. When he kind of mimics the voice of this alien. They're called fascinators, I think is what he calls them. And he doesn't even say like where he got that name. He just is like, I see a fascinator, and it's like, how did you know that's their name? I don't know. But yeah, so he broadcasts this message, and we get sort of a omniscient shift at the end where it says that this kicks off a war, but he doesn't know it because he dies. Oh, and we didn't say why. So he gets a call at the start of the story. And it's from like the local police chief or something, but it's clear that this is a fascinator who calls him and tells him he's going to die tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning. And he's like, no, I'm not. Fuck you.
Yeah, this is after he's kind of broken out of the trance. He like goes home and he thinks
he can tell it was like a command. He's like, oh, that was a command.
So he breaks out of it. And then when he gets home, they must have realized in some way, and they called him to say that he's going to die. Yeah. So he puts this ticking time clock on it, and you're like, oh, is he going to, figure this out and take down this whole regime?
Well, and then the reveal at the end is that he does still actually die at 8:00 in the morning. So even though he can perceive all of this, he can't escape it. And he does still die. So I think the idea is cool. It touches on a lot of the things we've talked about. It's very fast and sort of spare in its writing. I didn't find a lot of it to be particularly compelling as far as prose goes. I thought this was like pretty sort of average, I guess, if I were to be even maybe a little bit gracious towards it. It was written in the 60s, but like I've read stuff that, I mean, obviously, like Ray Bradbury's writing in similar time frames. Like, there's people who are writing amazing things in this time, and this just isn't quite that. So I can see maybe why this wasn't as well known. But the idea is interesting enough, and it gets adapted into a well-known movie, so it got a little bit of fame. But like, there's nothing about the writing itself where I was like, oh, I see why this is what was adapted. I think it's just the idea is something that John Carpenter fell in love with.
And I think we have run into this before, right? Where this kind of sci-fi writing could still get published at that time because of maybe a conceptual thing. Like, it's like if you just hit on the concept, maybe some of the follow through doesn't have to be there because people are so fascinated by it.
It feels very pulpy to me too. So like I think there was an appeal to like it doesn't have a lot of literary merit. It's just kind of a fun thing, and it talks about kind of a cool concept. And it was interesting that he didn't go the route of leaving it psychologically ambiguous. And you could maybe argue it is if you don't trust the omniscient narration at the end, but I felt like the omniscient narration came in at the end to assure us that we didn't just read about a man have a mental break where he went on a killing rampage and was completely out of his mind.
And I was willing to entertain that perspective up until the end of the story. I was like, is this like his girlfriend not seeing the same thing he is, and he can't seem to break her out? I'm like, well, that's, maybe this guy's unreliable and he just lost it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it kind of tries to not engage with that. It's like, that's not what's happening. He woke everybody up. This is real. He was the only one who could see it. And so it's interesting because it's like, it's just a different kind of story, right? Then if you tell the other story, it's very interesting, but in a different way. And then it becomes more about the psychology of someone who maybe believes something.
And we talked about the lizard people, and I'm like, I am curious if this is the beginning of lizard people as a...
I don't know. It's interesting because I remember listening to a podcast about this, and I don't remember this specific story coming up, but it's also possible that it did, and I just, in one year and out the other, because it's such a small detail. I really don't know where that falls along the line and whether or not this had anything to do with it. Or maybe it had already started and you heard about it. Although I think it started later. Like, the 63 is pretty early. I was kind of surprised at how old this was. And so, I mean, I think it's interesting to note, like, 60s would have been probably Cold War era. Like start of counterculture movement, which was a little bit of like hippie culture, was probably around that time. And so starting to have some pushback on the man and sort of establishment. So he was leaning into that, I think. That
was definitely the kind of cultural shift. And especially with as far as like politics and this idea of like shadow government or whatever, a shadow organization. that kind of controls everything. I think that like that's when people stopped kind of believing the government as much and giving them as much leeway. You had Watergate and Vietnam and all that shit that like led into people feeling more skeptical. And then you get into a story like this. And I think I imagine it was pretty interesting to think of at the time. And even in the 80s when the film was made, I just think that it probably had so much more to engage with. And I think in today's day and age, we're like, I don't know if you believe in any of that kind of stuff or not, but it's been so trodden that now that like the idea of I think there's no question that there are powerful people that we might not know the names of that can influence things. But the idea of these like Illuminati or shadow organizations and stuff is just, it doesn't, in today's day and age, it feels a little quaint almost. And then it may have been this like thing that was worth engaging with in a sense, because people were still kind of thinking the best of everyone or thinking the best of the government at least.
Yeah, man. It's touching on a lot of interesting topics here. And I want to start to move it into the movie because I kind of want to bring it all together as we talk about this. But my sort of reaction to this in general, and I'm talking movie and story now as we start to move into the movie, is I feel like I love people emphasizing that we should be aware of the levers of control and influence that exist in our society and looking at the subtext behind things, which is kind of funny because it seems to be what these glasses are revealing, right? Like to some extent, I think that's why they're so memorable, is they seem to reveal the subtext behind each of these messages. And I think that's a really cool concept. And it shows, like the way that capitalism and power and keeping us in line, like all of these things are all tied together. There's a moment in the movie where he looks over at that, like someone's holding money and it says, "This is your God." And I thought that was like a very direct, like capitalism is to blame here. And I think all of that's really cool. And I think it's really good for people to be aware of that. I do think there is a danger of thinking that there is a shadowy organization behind it that is inhuman, because that gets into really dark territory really fast if people start taking that to be true, rather than there are humans out there who are aware of these levers of control and deploying them, which I think is really the metaphor is what it's going for here. But then also just recognizing like that all this language has been co-opted by the very people that it's criticizing, and they have turned it against us. And now they have made people think that, no, I'm the one who's not the shadowy organization. It's the others. And so, you know what I mean? Like there's a way to use all of this language against us and to say that they're the ones who are trying to control you by trying to tell you that capitalism isn't good and trying to tell you that, you shouldn't be entitled to the money that you earn. And like, it's like all that stuff. Like you can use the same kind of language to throw it the other way, and people do.
So there was a time where like questioning everything and being skeptical, and even today that is to be applauded. Like that's something you should do, is think critically.
Yeah, you should absolutely question authority.
But then there's this spiral that we've seen where people say, all right, we'll question everything, even experts, even people who know what, like that the science behind things, the facts that exist.
Yeah.
That then you get into the territory of maybe someone who is less informed, just questions everything to the point that it becomes a detriment.
Because someone comes along and tells you your gut is right. And if someone tells you something from a position of knowledge, but it doesn't feel right to you in your gut, to ignore the position of knowledge, ignore the elites because they have some ulterior motive you can't see, and instead go with your gut. Your gut's always right. And this is not true, and it's a very dangerous way to view the world because it will mean you always go with your sort of base instinct. And we know people's base instincts often lead them to some of their like worst attributes coming to the fore.
And not to mention, like you talked about the idea that they're seeing these people as inhuman. So you get yourself into a territory where people like to simplify things and like sort of have mentality of like groups and things like that, and they find ways to make people different or otherize them, and then you're getting into the territory of no, that person they're not an alien, they're not a lizard person, they're just different than you, and they think differently than you. You should be able to have some common ground and maybe have some conversations to see if there's things that can be bridged or anything like that. But then it's the extreme of it's the binary of are you like me or are you against me? And if you're against me, then you are, like this movie would have you believe, worth immediately shooting, or you know what I mean? Like then it gets into dangerous territory.
As soon as you start equating people with an enemy that is subhuman, it gets into some really dangerous territory, because we've seen this language used time and again in terms of race. And in fact, a lot of this mirrors some very unfortunate anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that exist in the world. And I've even seen that John Carpenter had to come out and sort of clarify.
All right, so I'm going to give you the context of like John Carpenter creating the film, and so like we'll get back and I'll talk about him a little bit, but his idea of creating the film, he said that the film's political commentary derives from his dissatisfaction with then US President Ronald Reagan's economic policies, also known as Reaganomics, and what Carpenter viewed as increasing commercialism in both popular culture and politics of the era. Upon the film's release, Carpenter remarked, quote, "The picture's premise is that the Reagan Revolution is run by aliens from another galaxy. Free enterprisers from outer space have taken over the world and are exploiting Earth as if it's a third world planet. As soon as they exhaust all our resources, they move on to another world. I began watching TV again. I quickly realized that everything we see is designed to sell us something. It's about wanting us to buy something. The only thing they want to do is take our money." The director commented on the alien threat in an interview. "They want to own all our businesses. A Universal executive asked me, quote, 'Where's the threat in that? We sell out every day.' I ended up using that line in the film." The aliens were deliberately made to look like ghouls, according to Carpenter, who said the creatures are corrupting us, so they themselves are corruptions of human beings. So that's like his context of like at the time, maybe a little bit after DVD commentary, maybe he comes back to talk about that kind of some of that kind of stuff. But then in 2017, neo-Nazis were taking interpretations of the film's themes, like you said, thinking anti-Semitically that the Jews run the world and they're the money people and all of those anti-Semitic views. Carpenter further clarified that the film, quote, "is about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism and has nothing to do with Jewish control of the world."
Yeah. And I think if you watch the movie, honestly, you can tell that that's not what it's about, but people don't do that. So
yeah, they see like a white man leading action hero of the 80s and they immediately think that's the thing to strive for. So
well, it's almost like critical thinking and understanding artistic nuance is not something that's necessarily in the wheelhouse of these people.
Yeah, I just I'm of Jewish descent, so like this anti-Semitism and all the stuff that comes in with the co-opting of art in that way, when it's so clearly just a lack of understanding, it's user error. Okay, like it's like that's on you if that's what you take from the film, but it's absolutely not about that. And in fact, it's basically like you are the kind of person that the film is pointing to and like warning everyone about, and then trying to take it in that way is, I don't know, it's gross. So let's talk about John Carpenter here. We covered him way back when at the beginning of the podcast. What was that, 2016 or something like
17,
that? So
yeah.
2017, quite a long time ago, just to do our due diligence and make sure that John Carpenter is covered. He's an American filmmaker, composer, and actor, most commonly associated with horror, action, and science fiction films of the 1970s and 80s. He is generally recognized as a master of the horror genre. At the 2019 Cannes Film Festival, the French Directors Guild gave him the Golden Coach Award and lauded him as, quote, "a creative genius of raw, fantastic, and spectacular emotions." Incredible guy. He's made some absolutely iconic films.
Yeah.
That include Halloween, 1978, The Fog, 1980, talked about Escape from New York in 1981, often collaborates obviously with like Kurt Russell. We talked about The Thing way back when.
Ghosts of Mars.
Yeah, Ghosts of Mars. I mean, Assault on Precinct 13, Christine, like it just goes on and on.
Some of those movies not as good as others. Just saying.
Yeah, but I will say like he's the type of filmmaker that like I want to see all of his films. You know what I mean? Like he at least has an interesting creative voice and isn't going to be somebody who's very predictable.
Yeah, interesting guy. I love that he's also a composer. I've listened to some of his music. He was one of the composers for this film, which had a really interesting score. Yeah.
Yeah, and then one of the most iconic horror scores ever, Halloween, was completely done by him as well. That
I
was
didn't know that.
one of
That's
his
cool.
early successes. He wrote, directed, composed everything on that
Wow.
film.
I need to watch that movie again. It's been years.
I mean, it's one of the best. It's just like in terms of just the horror like slasher genre.
Isn't
Gotta
it
be
cool
one
that
of the
it's
best.
called Halloween? I feel like
Yeah.
that's like one of the movies that deserves to have the name of the holiday
Yeah.
associated with it. There could be so many
Totally.
worse movies named Halloween that wouldn't have lasted like this one.
Definitely.
Michael Myers, I mean, maybe the most iconic horror villain of all time. I don't know, up there for sure.
I mean, at least slasher, right? I think he's even you have Freddy, Jason, all those guys, but I think Michael Myers is the guy. Like,
He's probably the guy, yeah.
of course, there's so much with somebody who's known as like a master of a genre, so much more to dig into. But let's start talking about the film and how it was developed. Carpenter acquired the film rights to both the comic book and short story and wrote the screenplay using Nelson's story as a basis for the film structure. Because the screenplay was the product of so many sources, a short story, a comic book, and input from cast and crew, Carpenter decided to use the pseudonym Frank Armitage, an allusion to one of the filmmaker's favorite writers, H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, Henry Armitage is a character in Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror.
Okay, yeah.
The casting of Roddy Piper, I've read so many other actors were considered for this role.
It felt to me, and I was going to say, and maybe it's just because I'm used to seeing him in John Carpenter movies, but this really felt like it could have been a Kurt Russell role, and it would have fit him really well.
Well, guess what? He wrote the role for Kurt Russell.
It felt like it was written for him. That's amazing. I didn't know that, for the record.
So he wrote it for him, and then ultimately decided that he wanted to go with someone who wasn't necessarily like a Hollywood actor. So that's where he apparently is kind of a massive wrestling fan, or
Interesting.
was. Not sure how long he kept up that fandom, but he met Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 3 in early 1987. He said it was an easy choice to cast Roddy Piper. Quote, unlike most Hollywood actors, Roddy has life written all over him. So like a dig at Hollywood actors, and also saying that Roddy Piper seems to be like a very like, I don't know, worldly kind of person.
So should we talk a little bit about how we felt about Roddy Piper in his performance now, or?
Yeah, we definitely should.
Yeah, I think that this was kind of a mistake. I have nothing against wrestlers getting into acting. I think they can certainly do it well. We've seen some of them do it very well. I just think in this role, he was a bit of a weakness in this movie. Sure, he gave some iconic lines. He does well in the fight scene, which we'll talk about later. He's okay, but there was moments where they were asking him to show emotional depth. They were asking him to convey complex emotions. They were asking him to convey certain kinds of just difficult emotional sequences to put on screen. And you need someone who knows what they're doing for that, and is an actor, I think, because I think this movie suffers a bit of for what is kind of a bland, often not emotive performance from Roddy Piper at times.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that like I don't think that he's able to bring like a ton of just like thespian elevation to the role. I think that Roddy Piper, in a weird way, like fits what the role was in general. I get what you're saying about like some of the more emotional beats, but I do think that like if I think back to like Arnie in Predator or something like that, like the 80 like fucking Stallone and Rambo, like maybe they were better emotionally for some of those scenes. I should probably like rewatch them before I make that statement. I think they're better, but I'm saying like he's like it's close enough to where I'm like,
it's not as big of a gap as you might think.
Yeah. It's not like he's trying to like have him film some like, Oscar bait worthy.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying he was terrible.
Yeah. I do think that like it's notable that he's in this film, and I do think it's iconic partially because of him. And like I don't know. He is definitely an important piece to the cog that made this film.
This movie is the way it is partially because it's Roddy Piper in this role, for sure.
And like, it's, a wrestler dropping these one-liners and stuff, like if that's the thing you're going to the theater for, like he does it well. Fairly straight face, like he's fucking giving the finger to the aliens as he's dying at the end of the story and shit. Like I don't know, it's a crazy sort of role to try to nail down. But I think like most people who are big fans of the movie would say like Roddy's part of what made it for them.
Sure, and I'll just one last thing about it, and then I'll leave him alone because I'm not trying to take away from the fact that this is like an iconic role for him. But I do think there are actors out there who go against that sort of thespian, classically trained type. Because I agree, someone like that probably wouldn't have worked in this role, but we've seen lots of different actors over the years come from different kinds of backgrounds and still are able to learn enough about the craft of what they're doing to be really, really convincing on screen, and yet still bring a sort of grittiness to their roles that comes from authenticity.
I mean, other wrestlers, right, have given better performances, obviously, like to just like correlate those kinds of things. Like, yes, definitely. But I think like, I guess what I'm getting at is like the rawness of him, and like the fact that it's not polished in a sense. Like, I think that like there's something to that people are really into. And so the crazy thing is that Carpenter and Roddy Piper will tell you they're very proud of it, that this film was like #1 at the box office for a few weeks.
Oh, wow.
And it like did well, and people were excited about it.
Interesting.
And then it kind of fell out of theaters very quickly. It disappeared very quickly because obviously the shadow lizard people like got a hold of it, and they were like, we got to suppress this messaging.
All the ghouls. Isn't it kind of fun that it's also a little bit of like an allegory for people going woke? It's literally about waking up and being aware of all of the the things in society that are keeping people
I just
down.
love the idea of somebody being like,
a movie about
you know
going
what,
woke.
movies, you know what movie's too woke for me is They Live. John Carpenter's They Live with Roddy
It's literally,
Piper.
he said like people are awake now. Like it's like
Yeah,
it almost
funny.
feels like the term could have come from this movie.
Yeah. So the movie costs about $3 million to make, and then it made that back fairly quickly. So as far as that's concerned, it was like pretty much a success. Early on, critics were like not really interested in it. I think that people were like applauding it for being kind of what we talked about. It's an action 80s film that is also trying to have messaging that is, I think, counter to what the norm would be. And they applauded it for that, but they're like, it's like so heavy-handed. But the cult following of this film, as time went on, it became just that. It was a cult sort of success. And yeah, the thing that I love about the movie that I've already mentioned, but I want to emphasize, is the look that Carpenter is employing of like classic sci-fi horror of the 50s and further back really makes this movie for me. The visual trick of putting the sunglasses on, showing these disgusting looking ghouls, and like seeing in black and white in the film, which typically you'll think it's like stripping something away, but really it's adding something. It's giving you something. It's giving you the real messaging, which I just think all of that like visually works very well. And some of my favorite sequences are when they've put the glasses down and we're seeing those performers in costume and some of the set design and stuff that they had to do to pull that off should be noted.
There were a lot of moments where I was impressed with the filmmaking going on, and I was thinking like, this guy really, you can tell this is a director who is a high level craftsman, even as he's making this kind of movie, which you might not expect. But I just like even some of the opening sequences where we see did you say his name's Nada? I didn't know if they actually said his name in the movie.
It's in the credits. Yeah,
the credits.
Sorry,
Okay. So this Nada character who's Roddy Piper,
which I think does come from one of the previous iterations, the comic.
Yeah, it's the comic. So he comes in and he's this like drifter who's looking for work. And the way that during the opening credits, we're just following him as he walks through the city, and it really puts us ground level, and like it feels gritty and it feels real. And we're seeing the sort of like underbelly of the city, and we're seeing what this guy's life's like, and we're seeing all the graffiti, and there's little hints because I love there's like a sequence where it says They Live and it transitions it to it being graffiti. Like I love that, was really cool. And some of these takes I felt like were really long takes too, which I know just even simple stuff can be very difficult when you have a really long take length.
Dude, so one of the first shots where Nada is walking down near the train.
Yeah.
They paid a lot of money to like get the train to come by, and apparently like they had to shoot it again because something happened. So like that was an expensive shot, and yeah, like the intention to the filmmaking there and making it feel like gritty and like really reflecting like the working sort of rural nature of like 80s LA and stuff, and a lot of it was interesting. This like underclass hero, right? Like he's not middle class. He's homeless. He's a drifter. He literally is looking for work. He's being held down by the system, and yet there's a line early on that I really liked because this would be a long story to really get into, but I recently was listening to an episode of Script Notes by Craig Mazin, and he was talking about like how to write a movie. And one of the things he talked about is something that I've heard elsewhere, but he was talking about how like your protagonist should have a lie that they believe at the start of your story, and your story is a lesson to shake them out of the belief in that lie. And literally at the start of this movie, he says like, I believe in America.
I believe in following the rules. And I was like, well, there it is. There's the lie our character believes that he's going to have to learn to break out of here throughout the course of the movie, and then he does.
That reflects very like conservative, like status quo kind of
yeah.
viewpoint.
Even though the system's been keeping him down, and yet he believes in it, right? And that's a very American thing. But then also I will say, like, him and going and living in this like tent camp that then is raided by a bunch of police and destroyed. It just made me think a lot about like stuff that goes on all over the country now, and especially in Portland, where there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness out here, and how there are raids on tent encampments, and how people can be very gross in the way they talk about it, and completely dehumanizing, and not recognizing that when you raid these places and destroy all the stuff, that you are destroying people's homes, even though they're just tents, like those are their homes. So this is a thing that's been going on a long time, and I really like that our main character was unabashedly a part of this culture.
I mean, it creates a viewpoint that you don't often see in films either, right? So I appreciated it for that. And then we also get Keith David back in a Carpenter film, re-teaming with Carpenter. And Carpenter actually said he wrote this role specifically for Keith David after they worked together in The Thing. He was like, he killed it in The Thing. I'm going to write him a role, and he really liked him for this.
He was really good in this movie too. And he was one of the people, like, every scene he was in, like, I felt like he was acting circles around Roddy Piper a little bit. So it was, again, another example of, like, someone who can do a different kind of character really well, but, like, knows what he's doing really well, too.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about, like, their relationship, because there's a bit to their relationship, like, off screen, and some of the stuff that they did together is cool to note. But let's read some of the plot, and then we can talk about that within there. So Nada comes to Los Angeles, California in pursuit of a job, where he spots a preacher warning that they have recruited the rich and powerful to control humanity. He finds employment at a construction site and befriends his coworker Frank, who invites him to live in a shantytown near a church, and meets their community leader Gilbert. A hacker takes over TV broadcasts, alerting that humanity is their cattle, and the only way to unfold the truth is to shut off the signal at its source. Those watching the broadcast complain of headaches. Nada follows Gilbert and the preacher into the church, discovering a recording of gospel music playing that, unbeknownst to Nada, obscures a meeting with a group that includes the hacker. Nada also uncovers equipment and boxes inside, but escapes when he bumps into the preacher. The shantytown and church are destroyed in a police raid, and the hacker and preacher are brutalized by law enforcement officers. Nada retrieves one of the boxes from the church and takes a pair of sunglasses from it, concealing the box in a trash pile. He finds out they make the world appear monochrome, but also reveal subliminal messages in the media to consume and conform. The most puzzling reveal, however, is they also disclose that many people are actually ghoulish, bug-eyed aliens hiding under human facades. Additionally, the creatures have wristwatch communicators that allow them to teleport along with surveillance drones.
So much to react to here, but I mean, just in general, a very cool setup for this movie. Some great reveals early on. The church, the way it was framed, with the light, and then behind it, it's like this kind of like old school looking church, and yet beyond it, it was the skyline. Are they in Cleveland? It seemed like maybe they were in Cleveland.
It's LA.
Is LA? Okay.
Yeah.
He says something about Cleveland, and I was like, "Are you in Cleveland right now?" It's LA. Okay. Anyway, but having the skyline behind it, I thought was a really cool, like, like separation, right? Of like, I don't know, like a juxtaposition of modernity and a church that represents the past, I guess, and also like maybe a truth, if you want to look at it that way, that is found there, and that he finds out that they are the ones who are behind this, and he kind of just stumbles into it and has sort of interesting interactions as he does, but and then the surprising raid happens. That is quite brutal. They're driving a bulldozer through the shantytown, as they described it in that summary. And
I assume that this is reflective of the modern day in possibly in LA,
mm-hmm.
When the film was taking place in the late 80s, and that is effective storytelling, right? Like you're tying it into the real world. You're creating emphasis there, and also maybe raising awareness in a sense, or humanizing, which, oftentimes, like we've said.
I mean, the broadcast that hacker breaks in and starts saying is like a leftist manifesto.
Yeah, it's pretty. Honestly, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it was. He's talking about how there's no more social justice and all this stuff. It was like, oh wow, okay.
I'm curious how much that aligns with Carpenter too. You know what I mean? Is he just like getting this into his film, subliminally feeding that to people in a sense in his art? I mean, he's fairly left, so I don't know how far he feels as far as this character does. But yeah, I mean, I like the way that Carpenter handled this film, and we get into that monochrome world where Nada puts on those sunglasses. What did you think about this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I love that reveal, right? Like I touched on earlier, it feels like it's always revealing the subtext of things going on, the subliminal messages, as you said. And a lot of that's really clever, and even if it's not being planted by the ghouls, I like the idea of glasses that just show you like the subtext of behind things. I wish that sometimes that was the case, and that we could help people see the subtext, because there's a lot of subtext out there that people miss.
And the sunglasses are kind of like a thing that it doesn't cost a lot of money to make sunglasses, and yet there are very expensive sunglasses out there, and often they're like a status symbol to some. And so to use that as like the thing that's actually like triggering the reveal is kind of interesting.
It's really interesting too, because it's like it's not something that was in the story. So this was an invention that he brought into the film, and in general, I like the way it was dealt with. Of course, like I have questions about how these things work, but like whatever. Ultimately, it doesn't matter that much. You just go with it.
Yeah. Well, it's cool.
It doesn't make any distinction, right? Like every single bit of media that he sees is this, right? It's all complicit. And it's interesting because it's like, once again, this is a movie being made by a filmmaker. It is seen, usually watched on a TV or in a theater. And it's just interesting to be like, it's all brainwashing. Maybe not me, but I don't know. It's just like, it's all brainwashing. All the books are, all the magazines are, all of entertainment is.
I just think it's asking you to open your eyes, man. Yeah. Just fucking open your eyes and get in the game. Yeah. All right. Because you're engaging in consumerism, but it's all terrible. That's what the film is getting into. I think.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe he's saying something about like how everybody's complicit once you're in a system like capitalism, because I all of the time am not someone who is going to say that everybody needs to live the perfect leftist ideology and reject capitalism in all of its forms, because we live in a country and in a system of capitalism, and if you try and reject it, you're going to be crushed by it. Like it is a system that is designed to keep you a part of it. You can find ways to push back, and I think people do. But I'm never gonna like blame people for wanting more money for something like their art that they've created, even though you could argue that's a capitalist way of thinking. It's like, yeah, it's because we live in America that is a capitalist system. We have to be able to pay for things in this system. We have to be able to live in this system, and so you have to participate. But there's definitely an element of complicity that you can't avoid, because it's a complicated situation.
One that I think people grapple with a lot.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it quite a bit as well, because it's like, in a perfect world, some of these things could work, but we're currently not in a perfect world, and hopefully we can get some. What it would be awesome is equality and fairness, and that like oftentimes capitalism doesn't promote those ideals. It promotes.
I also I mean, like, for the record, I think that in general capitalism is a negative on the world and on society. However, I recognize that there are reasons that capitalism is an effective form of economics, and there's a reason that people often operate in it and can sometimes do great things under capitalism. So I've always felt like there's a midpoint. It's not all or nothing. There's unrestrained capitalism that goes totally rampant and crushes people, and then there's capitalism with smart guardrails on it that maybe some people would argue is socialist, but you can start finding a midpoint that works. But like, talking about compromise is never exciting to people. People get mad on every side of it when you talk about it, but like, I really feel like there's a way to work capitalism if you put in smart enough guardrails and you put in enough regulation and things that can keep it from its own worst tendencies. That sometimes it can work, like creating a safety net for people who are at the bottom.
And we're currently in a situation where like we are in late stage capitalism, where I was talking about like, you know, the competition that may be good for breeding ingenuity or something like that. That argument to that side of things. You can also as unregulated as some of these, you know, companies become people, and as far as the law is concerned, and all these other things that they start to complicate where the checks and balances are, you get to the point where it's all about siphoning money to the top and like at maximizing profits at the expense of workers and at the expense of human beings and all that stuff. And that's the thing where it's like regulation could be helpful. But then you see people who are like revolutionaries who come along that are like, if we don't upset the system completely, then we're just going to continue to slide into this. So I don't know. It's such a complicated topic and subject that people smarter than us have to help figure out. Yeah. But I guess do your part to figure out what you believe in is fair and equal, because that's you know, everyone should have the same right, especially as far as the American dream is concerned, if that's what you truly believe in, same right to, you know, all things.
All right. I'm with you.
We did it. We solved it.
We did it. We solved
it.
All
right. All right. Let's move into the next part. Bit of plot here. When a group of aliens at a supermarket realize Nada can detect them, he is confronted by 2 alien police officers. He kills them, stealing their guns, and enters a bank where he sees that the multiple employees and customers are aliens. He kills several and escapes by taking a human, Holly Thompson, hostage. Nada attempts to persuade her to put on the glasses, but she throws him out of a window and down a hill. While Nada retrieves another pair of sunglasses from the trash pile, Frank comes to give Nada his paycheck and orders him to stay away, following Nada's killing spree becoming widespread news. When Nada tries to put the glasses on him, Frank resists and a lengthy brawl ensues. After subduing him, Nada places the glasses on Frank, who sees the aliens for himself and goes into hiding with Nada. The two run into Gilbert, who introduces them to the human resistance. They are given contact lenses to replace the sunglasses and learn about the aliens using global warming to make Earth's atmosphere similar to their homeworld, while depleting its resources for their own gain. They also learn that the aliens have been bribing human collaborators in exchange for wealth. Holly joins the meeting, bringing information about where the signal may be coming from. She apologizes to Nada for striking him, claiming she hadn't known what was occurring.
All right, so let's back all the way up to he gets the glasses on, immediately starts seeing these ghouls and calling them hideous. They call him out. They get on their little watches. He runs into these 2 police officers in an alleyway and kills them both. They like take a swing at him, I think, with their sticks. But he grabs a gun out of one of their holsters, shoots them both dead, and he's like, "Oh, you can die." And you know, this starts his rampage.
They are revealed to be aliens. Like, it's not that these are just cops trying to subdue them. Like,
they're
they
ghouls.
were aliens. Yeah, they're ghouls.
So then he goes into a bank, like the next scene, and just fucking shoots like 10 people. I don't know. He's on a full-on rampage. He says the line, because this is all it takes, and he is now just out there killing ghouls. It is quite the shift, and it feels like it comes out of nowhere a little bit, because up till now, like, he hadn't been a particularly violent person. He hadn't seemed to be someone who was particularly violent, but boy, does it turn on fast.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a stereotype in here of like, you know, homeless people being possibly dangerous and that kind of thing, of hobo with a shotgun. Maybe this is like a trend that comes from this film, but you get stories of downtrodden
Is that a
people.
Movie?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Downtrodden people who are there to make the system better. They're going to come in and they're going to make the system better in a sense. But then there's also like the area that feels wrong, obviously, about a lot of this.
Yeah.
But
it feeds
like,
into
it's
the
kind
perception that they're all violent.
Right. Yeah. And but it's kind of, it's not it's like trying to tell you it's not that kind of movie. Yeah. Like it's like, don't.
Yeah, and ultimately it's not. Like, it's interesting because it's dealing with some very serious social political issues, and yet it is kind of a dumb action movie, and this is when it gets into the dumb action movie territory for sure.
Yeah. And that's so he takes a hostage. You're like, I guess, supposed to be rooting for this guy at this point, which, like, you know, they're aliens and they seem to be trying to subdue
they seem
all
bad,
this.
but for the record, most of the ones he's killing are not armed.
Yeah.
They're just there, living lives. Like, they're like living their lives, and he just mows them down.
But the shock of how far the suppression has gone, like the subliminal messaging and everything that everybody can't see. But yeah, again, it's maybe a little hard to jump on board, but we're supposed to be rooting for him. And then he takes a hostage that is a human being.
Yeah.
And then it gets like the power dynamics are weird. The all of it gets kind of off-putting for quite a while.
Strange scene. It definitely, I think, inspired by the girlfriend scene from the short story would be my guess.
Yes. Yep.
And yeah, just a weird. This is another moment where I felt like his acting was really falling short, because like he can do the badass moments, he can do the one-liners, he can do the action, obviously really, really well. But this moment where he was trying to connect with this woman and like reveal some things and like show a little bit of a sympathetic side so we could maybe believe that there was an emotional connection happening, there wasn't much there for me to believe.
And it's hard to buy into an emotional connection that comes from hostage taking.
For sure.
And then going to her house and stuff. Like, it just started to get really, I was like, oh boy, this is not good. But I will say, she gets to fucking throw him out a window.
It's very funny.
And I'm like, it's pretty fucking sweet that she's like, I'm going to fucking outsmart this guy and toss him out the window.
She throws him out of like a 3rd-story window, and he just goes flying out, rolls down the side of this mountain, basically. And, you know, he's basically fine. He's like kind of stunned by it for a minute, and maybe he has some small cuts and bruises, but, you know, otherwise good to go.
Later, when she shows up at the meeting, she's like, I thought I killed you. It's like, oh, that's fucking crazy. You threw this dude out the window, and then somehow he survived it. But yeah, got to do a lot of stunt work, obviously, with his wrestler background, and this is one of the bigger ones. I do want to talk, too, about the relationship of Keith David, Roddy Piper, and like kind of what Carpenter did to create that. And so he went out of his way to make sure that they were creating a true bond, and like was like had them go eat lunch together, sometimes in character, and then they had planned to do a fight scene, and this fight scene was meant to be, I think, like 20 seconds or something like that.
Well, really?
Yeah, it was meant to be a 20-second fight scene, and they got into it, like Keith, they would like choreograph it together in the back lot of like a studio or like an office space or something like that, like where Carpenter had been having them meet him to talk about the script, that kind of thing. So they're choreographing all this stuff. And Keith David says that he got like really into it. Like, he loved it. And he said he never felt more safe doing stunts or anything like that, because you have this professional wrestler who's like teaching him how to throw the punches, how to take the punches, how to take the falls and all that stuff. And so that builds up into what I think Carpenter's like, let's fucking lean into this. Like, this movie's excessive already. Let's lean into this and let's just do it big. We literally get a 5-minute and 20-second just like kind of brawl wrestling match between these two characters when they're having this disagreement.
It just comes out of nowhere. He's just like, put the glasses on. No. And this fight breaks out. And it is so wild. It goes on for so long, and it like, it's so funny. I guess is the only way to really, like, I was laughing. Like, I was a little mixed on it in general, because like on one hand, like some of it does look very wrestling. And in fact, I feel like if this is truly one of the first times a wrestler like him was in a movie, this is an unfortunate trend that would continue, and still probably continues to this day to some extent, where when you put a wrestler in a movie, there's going to be a sequence where he's going to do wrestling moves on other people. And sure enough, that happens.
You mean somebody's going to get rock bottomed in a Fast and the Furious movie?
Yeah. It's just like, I kind of hate it. Like, I get why they do it, and it's there for the fans. It's there for the people who are there to see that person in the movie.
I think so, yeah.
But to me, it's always kind of cringy when it happens. And there are moments in this fight sequence that feels like, all right, we're just doing a full-on wrestling move here now, just for the purpose of doing that. But overall, it's a gritty fight. They just beat the shit out of each other. It's got a lot of like ebbs and flows to it. Like, it tells a little story as it goes, which I think all good fight sequences should. And it's an interesting one because the two characters who are fighting each other feel like they genuinely care about each other. So it has this like friendly brawl vibe to it, even as they're mad at each other and frustrated with each other and trying to get each other to do different things. There's like an underlying friendship still there. And all of that is sort of conveyed in this strange fight and how it plays out. that I actually really appreciated.
At some point, it's like this like brotherly, like testing each other's metal kind of thing. Like they're smiling and getting into it and stuff. And it is quite funny.
He
like
apologizes at one point to him when he like breaks the car window. Oh, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," like what?
And that's something I would ask you too. Is like, how much of this movie were you laughing at, and how much of it do you think it was an intentional?
I was
moment
laughing at a lot of it.
Yeah, because I do think that's like part of the intention of the movie. Like it's like you're laughing at the ridiculous nature of it, but it's also meant to be a comedic, like you said.
Absolutely, yeah.
So seeing this fight scene, I mean, it is really long.
Really long.
I mean, I was like, this is
going. You think it's over? Long. It's not over yet.
It's too long. But I think to the people out there that are looking for that, like it's kind
of it's something you're gonna remember about this movie.
It's a calling card about the movie. Yeah, it's like it's part of the texture of it at this point. But yeah, wild sequence, and just because he wants the guy to put the sunglasses on, which will change his world, and it would have him enter into the Matrix or whatever, or leave the Matrix, I guess, to follow that metaphor.
So he finally gets him to do it, and it opens up his world, and then all of a sudden they're like walking around together, and they go check into this hotel. They're both beat all to shit. They just like have like just a funny vibe with each other, and then we get another one of the sequences that I just felt like the acting really fell short, because I like I said, the fight sequence overall was good, and I can see what you're talking about with him just being really good at this kind of stuff. He's a wrestler. It's what he does. But then we get the sequence in the hotel room where he's trying to tell the story about his dad being abusive and possibly cutting him, and like I just didn't think this was delivered in a convincing way at all. And I was like, I could see what they're trying to do here. It's just not working, and it's too much to ask him to do.
This is like a low moment, not even necessarily like that terrible or anything like that, but like the in terms of the plot progression of the plot, like this is kind of a downswing leading us back up into the climax. Like this is like, I would say, like the start of the third act or so. And like it's like they're trying to create this emotional depth there, and I agree, this is the scene where I'm just like, nothing's happening.
He's not doing a very good job.
Yeah, nothing. Like I'm not feeling moved really. So I don't know. It's I guess a character beat. It's something that's there to build out the character.
They give one-liners sometimes that are complete non sequiturs that I'm like, what is this even talking about?
Oh yeah, it's completely random at times.
Yeah, at one point he turns to him and he says, "Ain't love grand?" What is this referring to? I think they were in the hotel room.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure. I was like, are you saying you love him?
I don't know.
Or like, are you like referring to the girl? It didn't make any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the case with a few of these one-liners where it's like they really wanted to say this one-liner, but like we're just gonna shoehorn it in.
Yeah, and I mean, to talk about the bubblegum line too, Roddy Piper had written that in like something he wanted to use in like a wrestling match or something like that, and he had written a bunch of these in a book.
That does sound like something a wrestler would say.
Yeah, gave it over to John Carpenter, and John Carpenter was like, we should use this one. And so like it's interesting because I do see like the casting of Roddy Piper, the use of him in this movie, as the fact that it sounds like he was a fan of wrestling and he wanted to incorporate that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna get really into this because I'm not like somebody who's super into gun culture or anything, but boy, the way they use these guns is aggravating to me. This was an epidemic in the 80s in general. So much just terrible hip firing. People refusing to look down the sights of their weapons. It's
endless ammo
so
supplies.
Bad. Oh yeah.
No reloads, endless constant shooting.
Yeah.
There were so many firefights near the end of this too. It's just like pretty much constant firefights against the aliens, and that's like kind of how this meeting ends, is they just get like blown up, and then people are in there shooting at the meeting.
Oh yeah, it's a shock. She's like has this really quiet moment where she's like talking really really low, and all of a sudden like it definitely tried to be like kind of a jump scare moment or something. And then just brutal violence, like they get mowed down.
Definitely. Another beat in here too that we kind of went through quickly was the global warming, the acknowledgement of global warming in '88, and like the fact that like the aliens are heating up the planet to like make it like their own. Like that's kind of an interesting concept. You got to get all the stuff in there for global warming. Yeah. So final bit here. Soon afterwards, the meeting is raided by police, with the majority of those present killed and the survivors scatter. Nada and Frank are cornered in an alley, but Frank activates an alien wristwatch, opening a portal to the alien spaceport on Earth under Cable 54, an alien-run news network. Coming across a meeting of aliens and collaborators celebrating the defeat of the human resistance, they are approached by a drifter from the shanty town, now a collaborator. Mistaking them for new recruits, he gives the pair a tour of the facility where the aliens broadcast a signal that prevents humans from identifying them and their hidden messages. Nada and Frank locate Holly and fight their way to the transmitter on the roof, but Holly herself, a collaborator responsible for the raid, murders Frank. Nada kills Holly and destroys the transmitter, but is mortally wounded by a police helicopter. With the signal shut down, Nada gives them the middle finger as he dies. Meanwhile, humans all over the world discover aliens hiding among them.
So a while into this movie, we get the big meeting of all of the like ghouls and the human collaborators. They just kind of walk into. It's so funny how they just walk around into stuff and they don't even try. And people are just like, oh, I guess they're supposed to be here. So funny. And then that one guy who's like, oh, let me tell you all about it. Let me give you the tour. And they're just like, okay. And they just like walk with him and he shows them all this stuff. The sort of the very funny sequence of the space travel stuff that just looks pretty wild, but it's kind of charming, I guess.
Yeah, they went there.
Yeah.
We jump into a little pothole that takes us down into the bottom and walk through the base and stuff.
And then they go up into the TV studio, randomly find Holly, which I guessed she was going to be traitor at the point in which they found her because it was a little bit too convenient. But I maybe should have known earlier. I wasn't. At what point did you figure that out? I wonder.
I think that the reason you don't pick up on it, and I think I picked up on it late too. I don't know that was something that I was like really expecting, but I think it's because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like she hasn't been set up that way, and like, does she deserve? I guess because she's collaborating, she deserves to die. But like, why make that character a collaborator? She didn't even.
Well, I think because they had shown that her like home was quite nice, and I guess the idea is that she is benefiting from it, so that's why she is on the payroll. I guess is the implication. I
didn't get it. I guess even knowing that, I'm like, what's the like? I get that that's how they justify it, but I'm like, what's the point of having her?
Well, and she says like, there's no point. Like they can't be stopped. So she's like, I guess she's full like nihilist about the whole situation, which maybe there's a commentary about that, like people who don't think it can be helped, who actually end up sort of propping it up because they don't think it can be any other way.
Yeah, but she's kind of the final villain here at the end. Like she's like on top of the building.
Well, and she surprisingly kills Frank like off screen, and then like we never see him again. That was kind of interesting.
So shocking. Yeah, everybody's just dying at the end of this, and it's in keeping with the short story.
Yeah,
and I guess it's like against what you would expect in these kinds of movies of this time, where the hero would die in this way.
Yeah, hero dies, but he reveals, and it is like you said, it's similar to the short story, and in fact, there's another frame in the comic which makes it into this movie. That's the woman who's having sex with a ghoul, and she sees that their real form. That's right out of the comic.
We got to talk about that too. How that's done in this film is really funny to me.
Yeah,
and like of course this is like objectifying. There's this like 80s style objectification sequence, which John Carpenter is saying like, sex is selling you something. Like that's what this whole movie is kind of about, is all the subtext of people selling you stuff and trying to control you and procreate because of this and that. The fucking line that gets dropped leading into this is like, it almost is like a Gene and Siskel sort of like movie commentary kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he's complaining about sex and violence in the media, and the dialogue breaks off, but he says, filmmakers like George A. Romero and John Carpenter have to show some restraint. They're simply, and then it cuts off.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to
that scene.
this gratuitous topless scene.
Yep.
where she, and then it's revealed that like all the humans are now, because they destroyed this communication device, whatever it was, that it was like, creating the illusion.
Yeah.
And so everyone can now see the ghouls, and she's like over top of a ghoul that she was clearly having sex with. And like, that's the big reveal. And that's how the movie ends too.
Yeah.
And then it just cuts to the credits.
Yeah. It's funny. It gets meta there at the end. He's taking a little shot maybe at his own critics. Also kind of positioning himself. And it's funny that he associates himself with Romero there. It's like me and George Romero. We're the good ones,
Yeah. I'm sure that they were friends.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
yes.
they must have been.
It is interesting. Those are the two names that get dropped. I mean, it's a fun way to end the movie. Like you said, unexpected, it goes kind of in a wild direction, but, I mean, it's like, sure, there are lots of ways I could criticize this, but like ultimately, what's the point? This is an 80s movie. It's I like that it is kind of operating in its time. Like there's a line early on where it talks about like the new millennium is coming and like people are freaking out and panicking about the new world and like what things are going to become, and there's like fear of the future and stuff, and like that's an interesting thing to sort of have in this movie at this time period too, because it kind of situates it and like how people were feeling in the late 80s probably.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and the person actually like says this happens at the end of every millennia. That's an interesting thing to think about too, is like to look at that historically.
Oh, and in the big meeting, they say like our plans we think will come to fruition in 2025, which is
that
a year away.
Bothered me. That one bothered me. I'm not gonna lie. They name dropped 2025, and we have currently a plan called Project 2025 that I was like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing that's out there. That when they dropped that, I was like, maybe this is the plan. Maybe that's Project 2025, is that they're all going to be fucking... Unfortunately, it's not as fun as that would have you believe. It's actually extremely scary.
So this has been fun, but we got to come down on whether or not movie or short story was better. Ultimately, I'll go first. Ultimately, for me, this is a movie was better situation. I actually didn't really like the story that much, other than recognizing it had a cool idea to it, that I can see why it was adapted. I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite movies. It's cool 80s fare. It's worth seeing. It's very dated in many ways. Things I liked about it, but then definitely a lot of stuff that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But overall, good time. And I have a lot of respect and admiration for John Carpenter. So yeah, definitely give into the movie on this one.
Yeah, it's cool to situate it in John Carpenter's sort of filmography and think about like where he was at, the kind of movie he's making. It is kind of meta in quite a few ways, and rough around the edges, no question. A lot of 80s movies are. This one has some stuff that's off-putting to me, but I also like to see sort of the agenda going into this film, or at least the perspective given to this film. It's in the same vein of like a Terminator or RoboCop, where it's like a social commentary, and it's also left-leaning in the way that it's kind of willing to sort of buck the status quo and what was going on at the time, and to place it as a time capsule, I do think is interesting as well, right? As like the late 80s and Reaganomics and all this stuff that he was commenting on.
So you're giving it to the movie too?
It's the movie, yeah. It's John Carpenter. He's having fun with it. Warts and all, it's like I don't think it's even close to my favorite Carpenter movie, but I like that we can place it in the podcast, and I do think it's worth seeing just to have that.
So one of the things I just want to say about this too that I liked is that it showed that we need to fight back against this stuff. Now it showed it again, very broad way, but I think no matter what happens, personally, tomorrow and over the coming weeks, as we finally get sort of the results of this, there's going to be fights that need to continue, and I hope that we are fighting and holding people to account that are actually willing to listen to us, and that we can push in the directions that we want them in because they care what we think, versus having to fight against people who actively do not care what we think and do not want to listen. It's a different kind of fight, but also will become a very important one. So I think either way, there are fights to be had. I don't know that this movie is necessarily showing us a nuanced sort of a path forward for any of this. But I think the spirit of not letting the system keep you down is a good one ultimately. So I think that's going to be the sort of lasting feeling I'm going to take away from this movie, even if I don't necessarily agree with the way that it all plays out here.
Yeah, it's a big dumb action movie version of everything you just said. So.
Yeah, going on the rampage that our main character goes on here, I don't know how much it helps anything, but in the movie it seems to work out. So if you enjoyed our coverage of this movie, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We are getting closer to 1,000 subscriptions. I think we're at like 850 as of recording this, so within striking distance. So I'd love to get there. So help us out. If you're not already subscribed, please do that.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. We're also on Blue Sky, TikTok. Just keep an eye out and look for us on social media. We're out there.
Oh, and I wanted to shout out, and it's funny because we don't have anything on here right now, but Normally, if you would like to buy any of the books that we cover, we have a bookshop. And I always put the link in the show notes. If you go to that bookshop and you buy through that link on our Ink to Film store, if you buy any of the books that we've covered or any of the books of the guests that we've had on the show, we have 2 different lists that have them all on there. It doesn't cost you any extra, but we get a little percentage of that. So it's another way to help out the show just with your book buying. So we'd love it if you would use that.
And check out our Patreon as well. Just another way to support us, and we appreciate our patrons quite a bit. You get bonus episodes, you can get t-shirts, all kinds of stuff on there. Check it out. And thank you to Russ Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
Yeah, that's right. We just did an episode on Frankenstein, the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Kenneth Branagh. It's a wild movie, so if you want to hear that's our most recent one, so we'd love to have your support over there. But until next time.
Keep adapting.